Chapter 6 is a dramatic shift from the last two chapters, chapter 4 and 5 on philosophy. And this chapter is named it's the place of schools in society. And it's kind of fun, kind of controversial. The authors try to do a fair approach to it, which I don't think they do very well. It's really kind of hard for me to teach this one because I disagree with so much of it. But it's still fun stuff to talk about, and some you'll enjoy too. But what is that place of schools and societies? And what you're going to find is they do admit in this chapter, and in the last edition of the book they did not, but this one they do admit part of the reason of the movement of homeschooling is this, is the culture in the school. So it's kind of fun. Let's first jump over here and look at the outcomes. Here's the learning outcomes from this, and this is also on the chapter here. Looks like this: analyze the purpose of schools and how they contribute to the socialization of children and youth. So the purpose, and examine culture and its characteristics and impact the school choice. And we'll do a lot with school choice here that didn't exist a very short time ago. Explain why schools have evolved into different structures based on students' age, and explore how the place in which students live impacts their education. So they do a pretty good job on that. And there's one glaring omission here that I'll talk about when we get to it. So let's get at it here. Well, first of all, the purpose of schools. And if you allow me again, I'm going to just read a few parts of this to you that are highlighted. Schools were first established in colonial times only for the elite. Here, however, they did not mean the older children were not being educated. Adults, low income. Now, they use this term over and over. This is a made-up word that just came around in the last couple of years. It's a political term, often to elicit emotion. But back then, when they started out talking about low income, well, you got to remember, back in these colonial times, most of the people were part of the agrarian society where education wasn't necessary. So they leave that, they omit that from here about that. But they throw the term low income in because it elicits an emotion from you of sympathy and often of envy. And so you'll see that throughout the book, and I will sound off on a number of times, but I don't think that term belongs here, but it's the only word they know how to use to elicit that. So low-income families were sending their children to the homes of neighbors where the mothers of the women could watch them and teach them to read, because, like I said, they came from backgrounds where education wasn't important, not mentioned here. This is not talking about today, okay? It's not until the 1800 public school began. It included children of families who were not affluent. Again, so that they're a little class envy, but it wasn't what it was. It was because it wasn't necessary. Even so, children were not required to attend school for another century. So it wasn't required. Why would people send them? They're going to work on the farm. They're going to work in the fields. They're going to have very good lives without school. And that's not mentioned here. One of the goals of these early common schools was to mix students with different socioeconomic groups. And I'm telling you, what is the evidence of that? People did not send their kids to school so they could mix with different economic groups. Okay, the curriculum focused on teaching children to read the Bible, develop high morals, and become good citizens. Yes, and that was the reason even the agrarian people would have sent their kids to school, just so they could read, so they could learn the Bible and become good citizens. And they learned a lot of their good citizenship from their families. Okay, different today. Today's schools have many roles in society beyond common schools. They teach the basic skills of literacy and computation, but they also reflect society's high ideals, such as universal education for all children. Okay, and it spends a whole chapter trying to pull this apart. And back to this thing, what should they be taught? What should they be taught? We can't quite agree on that. Prepare students for knowledge and skills that they need for their future jobs. Should they learn to think for themselves? Even question some of what is taught? Okay, right away, even question some of what is taught. That's the school we live in today, that we constantly question what is taught and how it's taught. How we teach them in dispositions will be good citizens, be respectful of others, make sound decisions in their life. Should they learn to appreciate the arts, be healthy, active adults? And we saw some of this in last chapter of the different reforms. the Committee of 10, 7 Cardinal Principles, those things. Here it is again coming back. What should they learn? What should they know? And I'm guaranteeing you, you get to your point in the career where I am, you'll still be asking that. What should they be taught? So we jump down here. Our own philosophical and political perspectives help determine our views. So that's really interesting here. They bring that in here. It says, oh, it's your political perspectives help determine the views, the roles of schools, and definition of good education. And again, I don't know why you would go there, but that's where they went. And throughout this chapter, they're going to come back to that, of this political view. Citizens and education alike disagree with whether schools should primarily support democratic equality, social efficiency, mobility, or some other goal. Advocates of democratic equality view education as a public good to which all students should be exposed to liberal arts education. Proponents of social efficacy believe that schools should serve the private sector by preparing students for their optimal role in society. So they bring this up, and I say to you now, you come and you get after it here. You give me definitions. Here's number 1. Will be right here. 1, 2, 3, and they're in the textbook. Okay, so here it is. Our own political, philosophical, political perspectives help determine our views, the roles of schools, and that's true. But I don't know if I would jump on that like that. Okay, and then I highlighted this: school boards, educators, parents, and communities have their own beliefs and perspectives about the primary roles of school, and we do not agree. And I want you to write that in big bold letters here. Do not agree. You write that great big bold letters there. We do not agree on that. Okay. So academic achievement. One of the major purposes for attending schools is to learn academic content. You knew that, right? Okay, not always certain, but you knew that. State and national standards provide framework for what students should know and be able to do academic proficiency. Standards exist not only in academic areas, but also in the arts, health, physical education. Here it is. I said it wasn't here, but it is. The Common Core Standards, which were developed by National Governors Association, the Council of High School Officers, which is not true, was framed by the federal government, were created to help students become successful in college and careers. So it was the federal government saying to you, your communities are not smart enough to create your own standards. So we'll do that for you, and we'll say it's because otherwise you won't be successful in college and careers. And we were before, but now we have this. They identify the essential required levels of knowledge and skills in English. Schools have revised their curriculum to be standards-based, on and on. Schools, teachers, and principals are held accountable for student learning. And this is the big change, is now you're not held accountable for teaching, you're held accountable for learning, for achievement. And it's all about, test days and stuff, and you all lived through that, so you know about that they make a big deal out of those. Media reports of student scores and achievement tests highlight the school's ability to offer students strong academic backgrounds. Often when people would move to new communities and want to choose a school district to live in, they look at their achievement scores. And of course it tells more than just that. It tells achievement scores are often reflective of who lives there as much as how good the schools ran. It's more reflective of how many low-income kids that qualify for free and reduced lunches live there. Okay, so in some communities, parents camp out overnight, first line to enroll their children in preschool, hopefully jumpstart their needs. Okay, so let me come back here and talk about this. Here are the purposes of schools, and this is how we're going to look through them. Academic achievement, which we just looked at, workforce readiness, citizenship, social development, cultural transmission. And again, like I was saying to you, often it's these why we have homeschooling. Because families disagree with these and the way they do that. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Okay? So one of the major purposes of attending school is to learn academic content, and the reason that matters is because accountability. Now schools are accountable for what kids learn, and that was the thing of No Child Left Behind, was accountability. Okay. So what about workforce readiness? Okay, this is the one we can't agree on because we talked about this. Is school about preparing kids for college or for the workforce or both? And what courses are we offering in these areas? Okay, preparing students to contribute to the economic growth of the nation has been a major purpose of schools for over a century. Okay, and that's not profound, you know that. Okay, this conference board found that more than 9 in 10 of these leadership sites, education is very or most important in both maintaining competitive economy, reducing income inequality. Okay, so here, and this is another political word that's made up, but what that means is that education's the silver bullet. Education and workforce readiness. Okay, and we've known that forever. We spent lots of money on these communities that are struggle, and we still can't figure out how to get their scores up and get them better educated. Okay. The importance of education is related to the workforce projections that indicate 65% of U.S. jobs will require post-secondary by 2020. 65%. Okay. So the current sense of crisis regarding the students not being prepared to work effectively in the market-driven economy, I'll let you read that. What are the skills that most important employers? More than 100 U.S. CEOs, and of course that's the boss, I'm going to give you this just because I can. I'm going to ask you what that is. So this will be number, okay, this was 1, this was 2, this is number 3. What does CEO stand for? Put it right here. What does that stand for right here? Okay. And then, what are the most important to employers? More than 100 CEOs identified the following skills as most important, and here they are. And there's a question on the test about this, so please be able to rattle off those 6 things. The business executives rate the capabilities of workforce these skills as less than desirable currently. They're less than desirable. Interestingly, they rate the creativity and motivation of the U.S. workforce higher than other skills than this. So here, here's what the green is, how important they think it is, and the blue is how capable people are. So these employers are saying they need more of these things: work ethic, teamwork, decision making, critical thinking, computer literacy, basic skills. Okay. Then I highlight this here: business owners and the nation leaders also worry not enough engineers, computer scientists, and other workers in the STEM profession are being produced in high schools and colleges to meet the needs of the country. Production of U.S. students in these areas has fallen behind that of other nations. So there you go. The STEM things. And we know that. We hear that all the time. That's not profound to you. What should be the role of the school in providing and preparing today's workers? Is it to help students learn a trade or learn how to take orders and follow rules? These are particularly important when conditions are changing as rapidly as they are today. The vocation for which one is prepared, there's a question on the test about this, may become obsolete in a few years. So as a former vocational teacher, all I can say, it's never obsolete. You may need to have your skills updated, but almost every one of those skills that have been learned simply have to be updated. As any profession we're in today, whether you're in any professional profession or skilled one, your skills have to be updated. So I don't quite buy this, that the problem with learning a vocation is that eventually, very quickly, it's obsolete. I don't buy that. The framework of 21st century, this P21 partnership, which supported many business leaders' calls today, students of master and basic course. Down here, competent in more than one language is another one, which we've heard before. So here is number 2, or This was number 3. Here's number 4. You don't do anything this, but you link this. I don't want a URL in here. I want it linked in your notes. Okay. If you don't know how to link something in your notes, you ask somebody. You link. And same with this one. This will be number 5. You link this to an article online so that I know that you looked at this article. So 2 links. Well, let me show you if I can quickly how to link something. Okay. So you have found a link about this and you want to link it. So in here, I believe it's here, in this particular model, but someplace it's there, and I'm going to link it. Right here where it says hyperlink. Okay, and if I have looked this up, okay, and I know there's professors that go crazy if you use Wikipedia. I don't mind Wikipedia. So here it is. I take this URL, I copy this, I come back here, I drop that in there, I tell it okay, and I have that linked. That's what I'll accept, is it linked that way. Alright, that's what a link is. Okay. We're back here. Textbook. Done with that. Now how about citizenship? Here's citizenship. Oh, this is the rest of the work. 65% of U.S. jobs require post-secondary education by 2020. And here's those different ones from here. We're still up here. There's those work ethics, teamwork, and those. And this is the one I want you to look up this also. So now you have 3 of them here, and this is number 6. And you link this. So I know you looked at that research also. Now we look at citizenship. It has to do with classroom instruction. Let me go through this with you. Okay, so the belief here is that we send our kids to school to learn citizenship. And again, I will just say, as a family, we believe that is our responsibility. One thing I would like you not to do in the schools, at least, is tear apart what we teach about citizenship at home. But sometimes you do, and that's nothing to do with you. It's the nature of the beast. This is much more than voting in elections and knowing facts about the nation's history. It requires citizens who are informed and thoughtful, participate in their communities, are involved in the political process. That is so interesting that that is coming in there, and process moral and civic virtues. So this goes deeper here. Developing citizens to participate in democracy has been a core purpose of schools from their inception. The civic mission prepares students to understand and exercise their rights and responsibilities. Here I highlighted, the result of effective civic learning is citizens who are more likely to vote and discuss politics, as well as to volunteer and work in the community projects. Very interesting, because we live in a time where these are so divisive to discuss politics. that I'm not sure what we're setting them up for. They're also more confident in their ability to speak publicly and communicate with their elected representatives. And you don't have to be politically active to do that, especially in South Dakota, because we have a very citizen-based elected people. So here's the things we prepare our students involving in their experience campaign for the civic missions of schools, identifying the following proven practices of civics. So these 6 things you get to do right here, and this is number 7. You get to make a case for each of those, and that is right here. Okay. Become actively involved in campaigning for candidates during state and national conventions. And my problem with that is, of course, that's run through school, and schools are so one-sided that it really is a problem for a lot of families. And again, it contributes to the exodus of from public schools to private and homeschooling. More than 1 in 5 eligible voting population between 18 and 20. Common misconception that 08 national election saw a record turnout of millennials. Only 50% of them had voted. But here's the problem: if they got higher, the vote may have changed, and these authors wouldn't have liked it. But they're making a case that across the country, it used to be in '96, the millennial age people only 37% voted, but a national average is about 50. Does not vote, which is among the lowest in the world for youth. Positive signs engaged with civic affairs. Young people are volunteering for community activities. High level social civic engagement. Teachers, and this is the part here where I have blood want to run out of my eyes. Teachers can serve as models of desirable civic behavior through their engagement in community and political activities, locally, nationally, and nationally. That would make me want to pull my kids out of the public school system, because I don't want teachers teaching my kids about political activities. Schools aren't political. Why does it come that way? And I say schools almost are so homogeneous in this way. They're all schools are run by people that believe the same way. So there's not a balance at all. So there's nothing to do but indoctrinate the students. And so I adamantly oppose this part. Better know it. It's on the test. Disciplines of the National Council of Studies. I highlighted this. I'll read it to you because it's a little hard to read. Citizenship cannot be taught in a single civics course. Across courses and school activities, school officials, teachers work to develop democratic citizens who respect others, believe in human dignity, are concerned about the care of others, and fight for justice, fairness, and tolerance. Students who learn through practice in the classroom how to be active, involved as citizens. So that's not new to you either. So you have that. Now social development is another worthy goal. Students to develop their social skills by interacting with others. And everybody knows that, and this is the criticism of homeschooling right here, and that's why this is so strong, is say, hey, homeschooling doesn't do this. In the process, students should learn to respect others. They also learn to set a set of rules, working appropriately with peers and adults. That's what social development is supposed to be about, is this set of rules on the tests. Although schools usually do not provide a course that teaches skills in social development or appropriate behavior constantly reinforced by teachers. So we don't say, come to the social development course. We hope that it's modeled and taught by teachers over the course of all their courses. Students' opportunities to work with other students of diverse racial and gender and background. Those one of the byproducts of the interaction of students learn more about similar differences, which is cooperative learning. And they don't represent cooperative learning exactly right here, because cooperative learning really is a plan share. And you get to do this as number 8 here, is that definition from right here. Instead of learning a set of rules, working with peers and adults. I say that they've really kind of misrepresented this, because they get off on this tangent, and it really was about this when it was designed. And the whole idea was that you would assign different tasks to different people in the group. Well, anytime we say ability, group work, cooperative learning, you and I know, gee, we hope somebody steps up and does the project. But a true cooperative learning model really is based on assigning different people in the groups, different responsibilities, and then grading accordingly. Instead of saying, oh, group A, get an A for the group, that you say each person gets a grade for their contribution because you know what it is, and then the overall grade also, so 2 grades. Don't hear much about it anymore. Then this cultural transmission again. This cultural transmission is what sends people running to the door for the most part. Schools around the world transmits the culture. And I have those 2 things right here where you get to do. In fact, you get all these. This is number 9. But don't do these yet. Let me talk you through these first. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me talk you through, then you come back. Both maintain and pass it on to the next generation. Now it's a big thing. And in our smaller communities, we get that. I tell you, like, there are bigger schools, very hard to do that because we don't have any, we have less institutional history. It's hard to explain. I'll explain that later. Schools have often approached the task of teaching history with an emphasis on important events. Okay, so what is culture here? What is the hidden curricular here? Impact, values, expectation that teach the schools convey about what important for students to learn. And often it's non-curricular things about studying and those types. And values, the national values and rules are embedded. Schooling, most of the teachers and students do not realize they exist. Okay. For example, how important sports are. It's a hidden curricular thing. And especially in our smaller schools. And here's where it gets a little sticky again. These authors love this. The only exceptions may be students who do not feel part of the dominant culture. And here is the dominant culture thing, and they really take some swipes at this. Are those families that have recently immigrated. In these cases, students and families quickly learn that schools might not reflect their support aspects of their culture and differ in dominant culture. This dissonance between schools and families is most noticeable among students who are not European Americans, code for white, or those native language and is not English. Students from religious backgrounds that have not evolved from Judeo-Christian roots may also question the culture that is being transmitted at schools. The challenge for educators is to transmit the commonalities across this and the richness and contribution of these different groups. So there's a swipe at you white people and Christian. Okay, and there's that term for the dominant culture. Okay, let's move on to the next. So here is the role of culture in school. A dominant culture, culture of families, cultural values, culture of schools. Okay. So first this term. I think I put that in there. Yes, right there. Role of schools provides a blueprint for experiencing life. And I saw that someplace. Here it is, blueprint, how we think, feel in this. Our shared language, nonverbal communications, ways of thinking and knowing. We have the same biological and physiological needs, psychological needs no matter where we live. But the ways we meet those needs is culturally determined. Location of the group, available resources, traditions have great influence on these things. Culture is learned, shared, and adapted. And you know how that goes. You had the same thing. Your kid comes home, and they have new words or new slang, new ideas, often contrary to what home values are. And there you get it. And then there's some competing things. We learn culture through acculturation, which occurs when parents, grandparents, religious leaders, teachers, television shows, big one in transmitting culture is the television shows, and our neighbors can teach us culture and acceptable norms. That's a lot of what culture is, acceptable norms. We internalize cultural patterns so well that early in life we often have difficulty accepting different but equally appropriate ways of behaving and thinking by others, sometimes leading to miscommunication, misunderstanding society and classroom. When schools use a different language or linguistic pattern than they use at home with students, or when students' behaviors have different meanings at home than school, distance from schools and home can occur. Understanding cultural differences and learning to recognize when students do not share our own cultural patterns are critical steps. Okay. This is very true here. It's not stagnant. It's dynamic, means it's always changing. Okay. Culture, we move from one section to the other country or one state to another. Those. So what is this dominant culture which you speak of? The legal system, economic elections, and middle-class values our American society, which serve as a foundation for many of our institutions' traditions, are based on Western and European traditions, code, white people. And these authors like to speak in code like that. Over time, a common or shared culture has evolved from many cultures the voluntary and involuntary immigrants have brought from around the world. Involuntary is code for slaves. Okay, we have slaves now, sex slaves and stuff. Don't talk about them. We're just talking about slavery in the early part of this country. The dominant culture today is reflected primarily in the ways many middle-class families live. So there's the shot across the bow. You, white middle-class people, set the dominant culture. These commonalities make it fairly easy for people to identify as American when we visit other countries. The dominant culture had its beginnings in the culture of white middle-class Protestants. Question on the test, not Catholics. The early Catholic Church was what people were escaping England when they came here to be this culturally dominant class and be these bad people. Okay, so dominant culture is white middle-class Protestants who began immigrating to the colonies from Western and Northern Europe 5 centuries ago. Until recently, the ancestors of these early settlers dominated the countries. So until recently, these bad white people, white Protestants, dominated the political system, holding the highest government and corporate positions. In this role, they had great influence, institutional policies and practice that maintained their power. So these white Protestants only were interested in hanging on to their power. And there's no evidence here, but that's just why we write. Civil rights struggles of 67 to open the political and corporate worlds to a growing number of women and persons of color. During this period, the Civil Rights Voting Act passed, and rights of all people to promote greater equality across the groups. History as a nation of many diverse groups and experience in struggling equality across groups has led to the dominant culture changing over time. It reflects some values in that. What are some characteristics of common culture? Universal educational literacy of all students are valued. Our job career is important, being recognized as successful. Fun is usually relief from work, technology of all forms. So it takes you through that. And then you get these two, individualism and freedom. And you get those. Tell me about. So this should be number 10. And these two are number 11. This will be number 12. Don't do these yet because I want to finish talking you through these. This one's number 12. This one's number 13. This one's number 14. Wherever you see the dots. And this one will be number 15. Okay, so let me don't do those yet. Let me talk you through these. Culture of families. Although the dominant culture is reflected in schools at work, families' unique culture usually takes precedence in our homes. Students arrive at school with traditions, language, and behaviors of their family. The ethnicity of, for example, African American, Navajo, Siberian, and all these may be the primary cultural identification. They may speak a language other than English at home. Families also range into a continuum from poor to wealthy and can affect students' health and well-being and their ability to engage effectively in school. Families can also be greatly influenced by the discrimination they face in their race, so we can't get away from talking about that. Migration status, language, religion, or sexual orientation. Some families will feel their culture are not valued by school or society. And then this is interesting about how you learn your culture. And I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to be done with this. Knowing more about students' cultures can help you make schooling and the curriculum more real and authentic to them. It also shows that you respect their families and communities. How can you know more about the cultures of school, students, and the communities in which you live? You should participate in community activities and celebrations. Provide an understanding of students' cultural reactions. You could volunteer with community groups to coach, tutor, or serve food to homeless shelters. So if you want to learn about the cultures of your community, this is what you do, and they've laid this out very nicely. You could actively participate in school activities in the evenings and on the weekends to interact more with students and their parents. Another approach to learning this culture of your students is to take classes in ethnic studies, women's studies, religious studies, sociology, anthropology, and build your own knowledge base. You could read books and watch movies written and directed by people from cultural groups with whom you have little knowledge or experience. To help you think about the role of diversity training, 2 teachers' views represent different perspectives. So this will be our discussion question this week. Should teachers be required to take diversity training? And again, do not answer this until you've read both of these people's position. Okay, so that goes right here. Oh, I didn't get it. That's not right. It is here. There you go. Then cultural values. Let's see what this is. Is there gender, race, maybe even we may not know their religion, importance of their family unless we are wearing clothing or jewelry associated with a specific religion. We may not know the importance of their ethnicity or language. Therefore, we need to be very careful and stereotype them based on factors. The only ones it's okay to condemn is Christians. You're really not allowed to wear crosses or any religious symbols if you're Christian. Other than that, it's all good. Okay. Cultural values. All those schools are expected to transmit the culture of the United States to the younger generation. Here it is, highlighted. Educators do not always agree on whose culture should be transmitted. Okay, so get this. It's expected we transmit the culture of the United States. Educators don't agree on whose culture should be. You see any problem with that? See a little angst with that? Okay, we expect them to transmit the culture of the United States, and they don't agree. So it's always a dominant culture, even though diverse racial, ethnic, language, and religious groups have their own cultures and different traditions. How can schools begin to accommodate these differences? And then they take a few more shots here. Conservative politicians and pundits ignore diversity. I don't think that's a true statement. I would think they would have some research to back that up, but they don't. They believe that all students should learn the common heritage and adopt the dominant culture as their own. Multicultural theorists and educators present another perspective. They argue that students' diversity enriches the school community and society. They believe that pluralistic, that's a term you're going to want to know because that is slang here. It's code in which cultural differences are valued and integrated throughout the curriculum and all activities in school. If this approach, teachers draw on the cultural backgrounds and experiences of the different teachers. So again, they have no research backing this up, but their point is this is the school belief is a pluralistic approach, even though the community doesn't agree. Parents' choice of schools, including religious schools, homeschooling, ethnocentric schools, that build the curriculum around the histories and experience of families and the group, have been based on the values that the education can impart. Although schools do not, of course, the values are explicitly presented, values implicitly influence the formal and hidden curriculum. Okay. The economic order of society, however, some families believe that public schools do not value their religion, and I think, especially Christians, and I think they are unfriendly to Christian traditions and Christian values. Just what I saw. You have a whole different experience, but I experienced a real angst against anything Christian. Some parents do not want their children exposed to secular values in the public school, or why they perceive to be inappropriate, disrespectful behavior by students. You often hear that is why their kids aren't in public school. Some readers, they seem to be cause of extensive debate and emotional pleas. School board meetings, community forums, true. And here's your ethnic-centric. Move on. The emphasis of individualism and competition prevalent in many schools is not compatible with cooperative patterns of practice in many cultural groups. So there's a real cultural shift in our schools that you can't play dodgeball anymore. You can't. Everybody gets a trophy. Again, why we see an exodus from our public schools is that statement right there. These differences among groups can lead to conflict between parents and schools, and among groups with the community. Families turn to the courts when they believe their schools are wrong. They believe the schools do not use the democratic process in which they can be heard in the community, not support their petitions, and hold a minority position. School prayer, creationism, banning of books, sex education, segregation, bullying, and discrimination among those that have been tested in the courts where there's disagreement in the school. Because parents and other groups in the community may vehemently disagree with the values being enforced in school, teachers should be aware of their own cultural values. Knowing your own values as well as those of families represented should give you potential. Okay. How far are we? And here's the last one, the culture of schools. They're up in the air. I think it's going to get blocked. Schools, a culture that generally reflects the nation's dominant culture. And again, they state it like it's a bad thing because it's white Protestants. And the community in which it is located. A school's culture, which is sometimes referred to as school climate. Okay, know that those words are interchangeable. School climate and school culture, or ethos, provides meaning to students, teachers, school officials, and parents. Here I highlighted this. Schools have their own unwritten rules and norms for behavior, including how students interact with the teachers and each other. They develop their own traditions and rituals related to athletics, extracurricular clubs, graduation exercises, school social events, and ways teachers interact with each other and parents. And even though they have this, they are still bound by bias from the courts, because if your school agrees that we have a prayer at graduation, that is not our decision. The courts say that can't happen. Okay, so it goes on here, these other things that are cultural things, like mascots, cheerleaders, school colors, school songs. Over time, they have developed reputations of academic achievement to their students, or prowess of their football, basketball, other sports teams. They also develop reputation to establish safe and dangerous environments, either one. Greatly are influenced greatly by religious and cultural of children's families, and that's so. Patterns that developed in a school can have powerful impact on academic performance of students, which is teacher field. Culture of some schools very supportive and academic, with the expectation that all students will attend post-secondary education. Okay, so I'll let you read the rest of that on the culture of the school. And again, it also has to do with some leaving. So schools develop the histories and memories are transferred from one generation to the others, one generation to the next. And you, if you went to a small school where your parents went to school, you understand that. Your parents can tell you all about the history and the culture of the school. Some students become school leaders, fitting easily. Some thrive in a cultural environment. They are popular and have many friends. Other students never seem to fit in. And that's not profound. You knew kids also that never fit in. Okay? Some, because of school culture, is very different in their own family's culture, adapting school culture just in at home. Other students feel marginalized and alienated, which may lead to them leaving school before graduation. Here's the last sentence on this. As a result, some graduates have very positive memories of their schools and retain lifelong feelings of pride in them. Others remember never fitting in and never being understood by their peers and teachers. And again, that's not new, that's not profound, you know that. But I don't think it has as much to do with this background thing. It just strikes kids, and I worked with a lot of kids in generational poverty, and it had nothing to do with the school. It had everything to do with their backgrounds, and we're not allowed to talk about that, so we're done with that. School choices. We're going to hit this faster. Okay. School choice. First, let me show you this on school choice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And we're going to hit these a little faster. And I expect you to know about them and speak intelligently of these. Some of these you've heard of, some you've never heard of in your life. And so I'm going to point to where that you have stuff to add here. I left off at 15, and others You can hit these as you want. Let me just put these in here. Wherever you see these, you're going to add something. So this is number 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 things. Okay? And do them as you want, but listen to what I have to say about them and then do them. Okay? Because you don't want to miss a word of this. Because I'm going to go a little bit faster. All right. So, school choice based on your address only, not on anything else. You had no say until recently, and now you do. Today, increasing numbers of types of options of traditional neighborhood public schools are shown. The parents of 1 in 10 students choose a private school. So, did you know that? 1 in 10 in private schools. Their children, other parents choosing non-traditional schools such as charter and virtuals. And you'll talk about those. Problem many parents is not whether they have a choice, but which school is best for them. Okay. And here's public and private schools. It always drops off. The highest are early, pre-K to 8. Elementaries have more. It drops off a little in high school, but still, that's quite a few. So what about public schools? Were established after European began, the British in North America, owned by 10 of children elite owners. They're the ones that needed school. Don't talk about that. The pattern began to change. Massachusetts required towns, at least 50 families, to appoint a teacher and collect taxes to support it. We had that in the history part, back in chapter 2 and 3. Okay, and now you know that. Schools were expanded further in 1785 when the land ordinance required that all new territories, like South Dakota, North and West, and Ohio River, set aside a parcel of land, public school in each township. And a township was, I believe, 16 square miles, had to have 1 acre set aside to educate the kids. And that was a country school. My wife went to country school until she was in 3rd grade. And all the common schools were created in the 1830s for students with families different in social class. Most African American, Hispanic, and American Indian students attended segregated schools, if they were in school at all. Okay, and again, they didn't always value school. These authors want to apply the 21st century priorities to the 17th century, 18th century. I don't get that. I don't get that writing, but that's what they do. Okay. And curricular is in those schools focused on teaching Bible, morals, and citizenship. Talked about that before. And when immigrant Roman Catholic families expressed concerns about the Protestant Bible, remember, most people early here were white Protestants. And now the Catholics are saying, all we talk about is the Protestant Bible. And what became of that? The birth of 1842 of the Roman Catholic schools. And they exploded everywhere. And there was a time, my dad was in school in the 50s. That's 1950s. And tons of communities had Catholic schools. And they were not, if you went to a Catholic school, you weren't allowed to play basketball against the town schools. And so, for example, he played several times in the state Catholic high school tournament, because that's how many communities had Catholic schools, that they had their own state tournament stuff. And of course, everything's changed, but it went back to this uneasiness about the Protestant Bible, so they started their own schools. And to this day, most private schools the greatest percentage of private schools are, Catholic. Unlike private schools, public schools do not charge tuition. The civil rights of 50s and 60s public school goal for equal education opportunities for all students was an unrealized dream. Even today, many students of color continue not to do well and served by the schools beginning in the 1890s, helping all students meet high standards and expectations. Another articulate the goal of public schools followed soon. Accountability. Today, not only children with youth have the right to attend a public school, they're required to attend. So isn't that? Think of that. Not only do you have the right to do it, you have to do it. That's a little hard to get your head around. Today, not only the children and youth have the right to attend public school, they're required to attend public school until they are 16 or 18. And you told me on our prior lecture that it was till 18 in South Dakota, depending on the laws in the state. Almost, this on the test, 50 million students are enrolled in today, and when the census taken, and it's predicted by the year 2425, it will be 53 million. I think you better write that down, those two numbers here under public schools, this right here. 50 million today, headed to 53 million on that day. And I'm going to call that number 29. And you can put it wherever, just make sure you turn it red so I can find it. That you know that. Because you want to speak. Wouldn't that be cool? In an interview, you'd say to your employer, well, you know, by the year 24, 25, we're going to have 53 million students, and I want to be prepared for them. And like, whoa, who's the great professor that taught you that? And you don't have to give me credit for it, but you just smile and know that I told you that. Okay, so now we get into the public school choices. Parents who first offered choice to public schools and their children could attend the federal government-funded magnet schools. Okay, feds. And in the 80s and 90s, the state of Wisconsin passed legislation to provide low-income families in Milwaukee the opportunity to use a voucher to send their children to private schools. So, voucher, and you're going to write these in, is a check or credit granted to a school district by a district or state to parents to pay for part or all the tuition of the children to attend a private school. Otherwise, and there was lots, and lots still is, lots of pushback on this, that we were sending this money to private Christian schools, and most of them chose Christian schools, but there was no way for these low-income kids to go to a private school without this. And that's who it was intended for. And so that state, Milwaukee, saw it, hey, those are our best schools. Why can't these poor kids go there? So they came up with this voucher thing. Most public school options allow parent and student involvement. Others all present in some way to break the traditional public school. Creation of choice, also choice, and that's a big thing between schools, which some people believe will lead to more efficiency and effectiveness. So think of that. Competition. Okay, here, let me talk about this. This is the thing that's left out of this whole discussion. When you come back here to school choices, one of the things it does not mention here is the thing that our family took advantage of, and that's open enrollment. So my son open enrolls to another school that does not fit in under any of these topics. And the whole idea when South Dakota allowed open enrollment was this, to create a competition between schools. So if a student would leave their school, like my son, to go to another school, his state aid, state support follows him. So like homeschooling, when homeschooling kids walk out the door, their money doesn't go anywhere. The school district doesn't get that money, but when they open enroll to another school, that money follows them. And that was not always. In my time, that wasn't allowed. My wife was in the legislature when that was decided to allow. And the proponents of it at that time were so that when so many people commuted to work from their small communities to the larger one, into Sioux Falls mostly, they wanted their kids closer in these schools. And so it was for convenience. And of course, you can have lots of debate and stuff about open enrollment, about what it did to sports teams and stuff. But the idea was for convenience and this competition. However, research to date, through limited, does not provide clear evidence of trend toward higher student achievement in non-traditional schools, but in open enroll schools, people more satisfied. Is that of value if you're satisfied? Okay, a magnet school, like performing in visual arts, math, science, you read about magnet schools. Charter schools is a whole other mouthful. Charter schools become popular in traditional public schools. They've been created in an academic institution. The first one opened in Minnesota in 1991. Okay, so Minnesota was later. Minnesota has lots of charter schools. You know what else happened in 1991 in Minnesota? Minnesota Twins won the World Series. There. That's free. That's not part of the class. These schools include Montessori schools, Edison schools, experimental schools, knowledge, all these different ones. Charter schools are established through a contract with either the state or a local school board for a specific period of time, usually 3 to 5 years. The contract or charter lays out how the school will operate in exchange for receiving public funding. Charter schools have greater autonomy, and that's what it's all about. Flexibility, do what they want to do. The teachers run it. It can be released from district and state regulations. So that's a question on the test. What's different? They're not bound to these state and district regulations, such as hiring licensed teachers, following a teacher's union contract, using district textbooks. However, charter schools are still held accountable for student learning, and many settings have a diverse student body. 43 states have it. not South Dakota. I'm going to have you write that too under charter schools, not South Dakota. Okay. And who's likely to go? As you can tell, the bigger the school, the harder it is to get these charter schools started. Here's numbers for you. Let's see. Our states are strong. Charter schools is ranked by Center of Education Reform. Charter schools serve 2.9 million in 14-15. School districts with the largest percentage of charter schools are located in urban areas, with 86% of the enrollment in the 10 districts with the largest percentage of charter schools being students of color. And so here's what I'll say about charter schools. Charter schools really are for kids that didn't fit into these big schools. And so the charter schools end up being a lot of kids that are at risk meaning at risk of dropping out, because it allows the schools to run the school how they see fit, what serves the kids. It's akin to alternative schools. It's a catches kids that are struggling. Some very at-risk kids, but they have some success. The opponents say the problem is it takes money from the regular school, because that money comes out of the school budget, whether it's state or local, and yet they're not held to the same standards, same accountability as regular school. They are scores, but they can run it how they see fit, and so there's lots of tongues wag over that. Let me read this debate part of it. Debates continue from the impact and effectiveness of charter schools. Some critics worry about charter schools, traditional schools becoming more segregated. Some studies find that charter schools enroll a smaller portion of children with disabilities than traditional public schools. I don't know what you're going to do about that. Research on the effectiveness of charter schools finds that they are improving, but they are still below par schools. Why? Because the kids that come there are below par. Nobody talks about that. One positive element is that some school districts are beginning to encourage educators in charter of traditional public schools to share good practices and collaborate in implementation of Common Core and other district initiatives. And one article I read said the most common thing they saw in charter schools is the kids' satisfaction skyrocketed compared to being in the big public schools. And again, these authors do not mention that. And then virtual schools, you know about this. Online study increased from 45,000 in 2000 to more than 2.2 million in 14-15. Look at this. In 2012-13 school year, 310,000 were full-time virtual schools. 24% increase in just a couple of years. Most common reason for students to participate in online schools is the availability. So our small rural schools. Advanced place courses, those things. Virtual schools are generally tuition-free. Public charter schools, at least 29% of the districts of this. Vouchers, it takes you through that. I want you to fill that in. I told you a little bit about vouchers. Wisconsin was the first one, a public to private school with a voucher. Most serious point of contention of the U.S. voucher funded state education money for pay for a child into affiliated schools, the main beneficiary of vouchers. So still in the courts, still contentious. Washington, D.C. passes, and it talks about this in here. Because they have the worst schools. Washington, D.C. had the worst public schools, and they had such a mass exodus that they allowed these vouchers. And then, where is that at? Right here. Most expensive use of vouchers in the District of Columbia result of congressional enactment, Opportunity Scholarship Acts, and 4. Most vouchers are funded with tax dollars. Legislation that supported each limited to low-income families. State legislation expanded to middle class. Not all voucher programs are publicly funded. Some programs are funded in private foundations. Occasionally, we're doing some of that in South Dakota. Voucher is the equivalent. In Washington, D.C., the next president came in and ended it in D.C. after this 04. Okay. Found that students' academic achievement has not improved results of these programs. Parents may be more satisfied. because of good conditions, safe in school. Now, again, is that a value? Scores didn't go up, but the parents are more satisfied because the kids are safe in these private schools. Graduation rates have been higher for students with vouchers than kids that stayed back. Is that a value? I don't know. They don't talk about it. And private schools, there are large and small, day and boarding, single sex, coeducational. And I can't believe that single sex. If I'm going to, if you allow me, I'm going to change that, because I can't believe that that term flew. I'm going to say single gender, even though that's not accepted anymore either. Single gender sounds better, and there's a reason for that. So you'll look that up about single gender. And parochial schools are religious. This is interesting here. Still by far the biggest is the Roman Catholic schools. It goes way back to what we said, because the Protestant Bible were being used. My kids went to a private school that were other religion. They weren't any of these. Okay, and then now we're seeing a real onslaught of non-sectarian type schools. So there you go. You know, it's interesting here, the Amish, but how about the Mennonite, Hutterites they have in South Dakota? I wonder if they have a representation there. Okay, here's your single gender, and then homeschooling, and here's numbers. Estimated 1.7 million students are being homeschooled at home, representing 3.4% of the population of 12, up from 1.7 in 99. So it's quite a jump. 99 to 12, 13 years, big jump. Homeschool students are diverse groups. 83% are white, 5% are African American, 7% are Hispanic, 2% are Asian or Pacific Islanders. 80% of homeschool students is provided totally at home. But there's some then that do part of the day, 25 hours per week. Homeschool students sometimes participate in sports, sometimes they don't. This is about, if you're qualified to teach, but there's so much online. There's entire curriculums now that you can get online. Here's one to chew on, why they choose homeschooling. 9 in 10 parents to indicate they have made this choice because they have a concern about the environment in other schools. And again, you go back to the culture and climate and what teachers are teaching. Here, African American parents who homeschool their children report that the top 3 reasons they make choice to provide religious or moral instruction, provide better academic preparation in traditional schools, and try and advance their own values and cultures. Maybe successful students, homeschool students score 15 to 30% higher than their peers. They're always higher in SAT and ACT. I agree with this statement here. However, research studies are not yet able to determine whether the higher achievement of these students is due to the homeschooling or if they would have scored higher if they'd been in public school also. And I would agree with that. That I don't know. Here's what I think. I think parents of kids are higher achievers tend to value that time at home and know they'll do better yet at home. So I have a brother. Him and his wife homeschool their daughters, and they're teenagers. And they've never been to school from the very beginning. And this innovative online personalizing, that's all you right here. All right, grade configuration. Okay. Most districts have designated grade levels. However, the design of school-specific grades evolved over the past century. First school based on grades was in 1848 in Boston. So he was on the leading edge of establishing the roots of our educational system. Not everyone agrees with appropriate to divide schools based on age. So right now, we simply assign you to a grade based on one thing and one thing only, and that's your birth date. In South Dakota, I think it's September 1st. If you're born before September 1st and you're 5 or 6, you go to school. Otherwise, you don't. Suggest that age distinctions are no longer necessary. It's using technology, so they make some things about that. Early childhood things, Head Start, Montessori school, medical Dr. Maria Montessori, and we studied her in a previous one. Large groups, especially 3 to 6 year olds. It works with one child at a time or small group. Build an everyday Montessori school is uninterrupted 3-hour work period in that Montessori room. And during children allowed to explore an environment. This year's on the test. The same teacher remains with the same students as they move through the developmental stages, so that's a big thing. It's the same teacher. High scope model, that's for you. Environmental print is for you. Reggio Emilia program is for you. So here you get these. Number 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Each of these you get to put something. I'm not going to go through all these. 39, 40, 41. Okay. Elementaries. Here's middle level. Could be grades 7, 8, 9. Could be 6 and 7. Depends if it's middle school or junior high. Now the new thing, interdisciplinary team teaching and block scheduling. You know what those are. High schools, they have traditional. Too many graduates are not proficient in math and reading, as shown down here. With high poverty rates are not achieving at the high level, obviously, and we've thrown lots of stuff at that. The thing that's interesting is this group. Their successes is like the white, even though they have immigrants and everything, they destroy all the minority part. The Asian kids, for some reason, do well. We have family across the street from the Philippines that are all new to this country. None of them were born here, and they blew the socks off of everyone. They were raised in the Philippines till they came to this country, and they're all in gifted programs, and now college students all going free to college. And then the value of small high school, schools with within larger high schools. So this is about creating smaller schools in large schools. Research has found mixed results by doing that. And then high school innovations. Rural. And can you identify the difference rural communities, suburban communities, and urban communities? If you had to face down, would you know what those are? I'm not going to make this clip, but I'm just going to show you this barn needs paint really bad, and this here growing on here is very hard on that. This is rusting through. These buildings are about to fall down. That's an old farm boy. That's sad for me. You realize you haven't had any clips this time? Okay, so rural communities, what's special about them? I'll give you those. It's right here. Population lives in rural areas across 72% of the nation. Values tend to be more conservative compared to others. Values tend to be conservative, less diverse, often have inadequate funding, limited course. That's why they do a lot of hybrid and online stuff. Hard to get teachers to come out to my remote rural areas. Share principal in many cases in other schools. Then suburbs, and Sioux Falls really is like a suburban school. Population live in suburbs, continue to become more diverse economically, racially, ethnically, and linguistically. Better education in those, higher funding. On average, enrollment is higher. In other words, big schools. Safety is way less a concern. And then, as you know, urban tends to be our inner city schools. Rich in educational entertainment resources such as libraries, museums, theaters. In other words, we pour a ton of money in there. Higher diversity. That's where all the low-income kids are in those housing projects. So higher diversity, lower-income parents, limits ability to support school activities. And why they end up here is because they gravitate to the low-income housing. And those low-income housing projects are always in these inner cities, in these urban communities. Teachers generally have less experience, leading to less content knowledge, and less classroom management. So I would like you to do that, and this is number 42 here. Why? why are these less experienced teachers here? Then these suburban are highly centralized, authoritative, and bureaucratic, meaning great big school structures. The superintendent is 10,000 miles up above the school, in charge of big school districts. And so, in other words, highly centralized means we don't get to decide stuff at the building. It's all decided over here in the central office. And magnet schools as well as charter are popular in these areas. And then this is you also. The last one, number 43, is cultural capital. And that's out of your textbook also. This is interesting here. The largest 100 public school districts represent less than 1% of all school districts, but responsible for 22% of the public school students. So the 100 biggest schools educate 22% of the kids in this country. Do you have any idea how many districts are in South Dakota? So the 100 biggest, do you know how many school districts are in South Dakota? I think it's that many, 183 districts. And the top 100, the biggest 100, educate 22% of our kids. So you know how big some of the schools are. And here, who's in these 100 biggest schools? Well, of those, more than 70% get this, free or reduced lunch. And the big schools, look, schools with disabilities, I thought it'd be higher. Second language. Here's white, Hispanic, African American, Asian. Why? Because they flee, as it says here, they flee to the suburbs. And what this here is why. This here, this is what they don't talk about. It's this right here. This is what this is all about. This is where the poor kids go, because that's where the low income is. That's where the housing is. Okay, this one got long. It is hour 12.